you have been able to attend all of our webinars, and they have been helpful to you. I just want to give a few housekeeping things if this is your first one. All of you are muted right now, so no one can hear you. So if you ask a question, we're not going to be able to hear you. If you'll see in your control panel that will be on the right, there is a tab there that says questions. If you have any questions during the webinar that you think of that you don't want to forget, you can type them in there, and we will address them at the end. I'm going to be wearing lots of different hats during this webinar, presenting and trying to manage the questions, so I probably will not be able to address any questions you have until the end. So, but please feel free to just type anything in there, and we will try to get to your question at the end. So we're gonna start it off. Again, I want to thank Ken Finch, who's here to present. He was here for our first one with our minor technical difficulties, but it looks like things are looking good. So I am going to turn it over to Ken.
All right. Good evening. This is Ken Finch from Greenhart's Institute for Nature and Play. A few of you intrepid souls may have been with us 2 weeks ago when the technology did not want to work and we ended up with no visuals. The good news is tonight we have visuals. What we're going to do tonight is we'll be on for about an hour, including some time for questions at the end. I'm going to do about a 15-minute, more or less, review of sort of the core understandings of children's nature-based play and connecting children with nature and why it's important. I would probably do that review anyway, since not everybody on tonight was here 2 weeks ago, but all the more so since 2 weeks ago we didn't have the visuals. And just so you're not completely surprised, a lot of my visuals will look somewhat like that. I like to use cartoons, especially in this first 15 to 20-minute segment. Calvin and Hobbes are my heroes, and they were always having all sorts of adventures and misadventures outside, so they're going to help us understand a few things as we go along. First of all, I'd like to ask each of you to put your thinking cap on for a minute and ponder this question, which is very specifically stated. What is your favorite memory of outdoor play as a child? Favorite memory of outdoor play as a child. Now, because you're all muted, you can't respond verbally, but I do want you to be thinking about that. This is actually a question I've been asking groups for over 15 years. And so I've heard hundreds, probably thousands of responses to it. They've been remarkably consistent. For most of you, those are probably memories of outdoor play, and usually in whatever wild space was near to your home. It's important to understand that when I say wild, it really means wild in a child's eyes. It doesn't need to be, the Grand Tetons or Yosemite or something like that. For a child, their worlds are small, especially very young children. So it literally might be a vacant lot. It might be their backyard. It might be a little leftover piece of wetland in their neighborhood where a house couldn't be built. Or if they're a rural child, it might be the back 40 of the farm. But wild doesn't necessarily look to a child the way you and I as adults might think of it. But over and over again, these memories of favorite outdoor play usually are happening in some semblance of a natural area. During that time, important things were happening, and we're going to take a look at that. But first of all, we need to understand that childhood has changed, and it's changed a lot. There's a ton of research on this now, and many of you have probably heard this, but as one example, American children spend approximately 27% of their total living, breathing time now with electronic media, whether it's recorded music or computers, videos, phones, etc. Basically, they're generally looking at a screen. By comparison, they spend approximately 1% of their time outside, and that includes highly structured time like soccer leagues or t-ball. If you look at what we usually call unstructured play, time when the children are outside and just making it up as they go, comes out to about 30 minutes a week. That's a tremendous change from what most of us probably remember. So let's take a look by Calvin and Hobbes on how children's play used to be. Sort of like this. Wow, look at the grass stains on my skin. I say, if your knees aren't green by the end of the day, you ought to seriously re-examine your life. Touché for Calvin. Unfortunately, how children's play is now more like this. See, this is called the outdoors. Oh, I've seen this level on my video games. The outdoors has become more of an abstraction to children rather than the way it used to be, which was sort of everybody's favorite playground. In fact, as long as there's been humans on this planet, however long you believe that to have been, playing outdoors has been one of the absolute staples of childhood. It's really only about the last 30 to 35 years that that's changed. So what does it matter? It really matters in two primary dimensions. The first one is child development. This refers to the growth process of children, and it's typically viewed holistically, meaning different domains of development. Turns out, according to good research and lots of it, children playing outdoors in quote-unquote wild areas are getting terrific stimulation for all the domains, developmental domains. The intellectual side, which we tend to think of as academic, but is really much broader than that. The social and emotional side, which is how they learn to interact with other kids, but it's also their internal emotions of courage or resilience, their self-image. The creative side, which is fairly self-explanatory, it might be building sandcastles, it might be painting, it might be drawing, it might be just making up stories, but all of these things can be wonderfully stimulated by a nice rich outdoor environment. The physical side, of course, is physical activity. We are, as you all know, in the midst of an obesity crisis, and it seems pretty likely that there is a correlation between the growing obesity problem and the fact that children aren't playing outside so much anymore. They aren't digging holes, running for the sheer joy of it, or climbing trees the way they so often used to. And then there's the spiritual domain, and by this we're not referring to religion or any particular denomination. We're talking rather about that sense of awe, that sense of wonder that children gradually develop. Children begin life being very selfish, not intentionally, but that's just all they know is themselves, and only gradually do they start to become aware of the broader world. Nature provides a wonderful, gentle, beautiful way to start developing that spiritual awareness. So that's one side of the ledger, if you will. You remember I mentioned there are two reasons it matters, one being this child development. The other one, which is probably of more direct concern to most of you, is its effect on conservation. How does children's time outdoors affect conservation? The author Stephen Jay Gould put it pretty well. We will not fight to save what we do not love. For those of us who are environmental educators or conservationists or environmentalists, most of us are very concerned that future generations sort of continue our work, that they don't just turn away and say, well, it's done, I don't need to do anything. Turns out that over the last 35 years or so, there has been a lot of research done nationally and now internationally, and including among some very different demographic groups, trying to determine what is it that changes a little lump of human clay, a little child, into an adult who really cares about nature. That research has also produced remarkably consistent findings over and over again, looking for this, what are the most common influences on adult conservation values? Where do they start? Where do they come from? Turns out that the single most common influence is frequent enjoyable experiences in natural settings during childhood, which is researchers speak for what we now call nature play. Calvin and Hobbes can give us a taste of it. What you doing? Looking for frogs. How come? I must obey the inscrutable exhortations of my soul. Ah, but of course, my mandate also includes weird bugs. That type of frequent nature play, just going out and seeing what you find. The research says that more than anything else, that's what steers children to become adult conservationists. In effect, they fall in love with nature. Nature becomes their play partner, their buddy. They become comfortable outdoors. And they think of nature as a place they want to get to, not a place they're hesitant to. That is the single greatest impact. It's significantly higher as an impact than, for instance, formal education. The second greatest impact, and it's a fairly close second, is adult mentors. Basically, adults who share their own love of nature with children. You can get an example here. Wow, so you can build a whole snowman without reading any instructions, Daddy? Adults who love the outdoors, who take it upon themselves to help kids learn that same love. It might be camping, it could be hunting, it could be fishing, it could be hiking, it could be bird watching, it could be growing a nice backyard garden, but ways in which adults step in and say, let me show you what a great place nature is. Those adults are usually parents, which makes sense to most of us, but they can be grandparents, they can occasionally be teachers or youth group leaders, or any other adult that plays that role. Research has actually found a long list of influences that can turn a child onto nature, but those are the two that stand out above all the others. It's important to think, as we understand this, a real key of modern times, the heart comes first. Both of those dimensions of the mentors and the nature play are really emotional dimensions. It's not about learning per se. It's about feeling comfortable, feeling joy, feeling love for nature. The heart comes first. If children build a foundation of loving nature, then it's ripe to layer on learning as they get older. But without that foundation, anything they learn is not too likely to last. The challenge today is this. Nature facts have never been more available to children. A child who wants to learn about nature, it's all at their fingertips. It's remarkable compared to what many of us remember as children, where we might have had to look things up in the encyclopedia or listen to Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler on Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Those were about the only options. Today, of course, all the world's knowledge of ecology is at children's fingertips, and it doesn't matter, though, unless they care and want to learn it. It's the second part of this screen. Nature connections have never been more rare. So possibly 40 or 50 years ago, the limiting factor in creating the next generation of conservationists might have been knowledge. Nowadays, the limiting factor very clearly is forming these emotional connections. Kids need nature, and nature needs kids. Kids need nature because it supports their holistic development, all those developmental domains. Nature needs kids because we need that next generation to carry on the good work that's been done over the last half century. So the question then becomes, knowing that kids are no longer connected to nature the way they used to be, how can we restore the nature of childhood? My organization, Green Hearts, basically suggests three primary goals or activities, if you will. The first one, provide the right kind of places. Dennis the Menace shows us here. He says, but sir, we're not trespassing. We're exploring. Kids need to be playing out in nature, and they need places where they're allowed to do it. And that usually means places that adults don't much care about. Your local community rose garden is a very bad place for nature play. They really don't want kids digging holes to China and building tree forts in the rose garden. But those vacant lots and leftover pieces of wetlands or a little leftover creek, that's great land, sometimes called rough ground. It's a child's domain. It's places where they can play without having a park ranger get angry at them for trespassing. So that's one key dimension of restoring the nature of childhood. The second one is provide the right kinds of play. Calvin will give us an idea of this. Why are you digging a hole? I'm looking for buried treasure. Sort of duh, that's why kids have always dug holes, right? What have you found? A few dirty rocks, a weird root, and some disgusting grubs. On your first try, there's treasure everywhere. That's the right kind of play, this unstructured play that kids make up and decide themselves. It's very different than having an adult as a teacher saying, we will now play a game of oh dear. That's not a bad thing, but that's very structured. The best kind of play for building the bond between children and nature is this unstructured, make it up as they go, sometimes called child-directed play. It's important to realize, too, that it's not just about playing outdoors or outside. It's important to emphasize playing with nature, not just in nature. There's lots of great developmental activities that can happen anytime a child is playing outside. If you put your ping pong table out back, that's good for kids, but it's not nature play. Throwing a frisbee in a park is not nature play. Nature play is much more than using a natural setting as just sort of a stage. Nature play means direct involvement with nature. It means digging holes. It means collecting pine cones or rocks or leaves and starting your own little museum. It means climbing trees. It means catching fireflies and keeping them in a jar, hopefully for not too long, because when they're flashing out there, they're really looking for sex is what they're doing, so shouldn't interrupt that for too long. But it's really important to realize there's a difference between just playing outdoors and real nature play, of playing actively with nature. And then the third dimension to restoring the nature of childhood is provide the right kind of replay, which is really just another phrasing for frequency. Calvin will again give us a little example of this. Well, let's check my calendar and see what our schedule is for today. Today says do nothing. So does tomorrow, and every day after, all the way through the end of August. I like this itinerary. Let's get right to it. That kind of itinerary, that kind of just going out day after day after day. Once upon a time, in the United States and most parts of the world, kids would come home from school and they'd go outside and play. Nowadays, it's at least as likely and probably more likely that they come home from school and go back into a different kind of school. And it may be a church group or Tai Chi or soccer leagues or French lessons or any one of a zillion other adult-designed, adult-controlled activities. These are all good for kids individually, but when we pile them on, kids are left with very little free time to just go outside and play with this kind of itinerary of do nothing. So what makes good nature play? The right kind of place, the right kind of play, and the right kind of replay. As we start thinking about this, I want you all to remember again that this can happen in very small spaces. Oftentimes when I talk about nature play, adults have these images of beautiful, pristine parks where you can wander for mile after mile. Kids simply don't need that. A little dose of nature can go a long, long ways. And we'll get a quick illustration here. I like puddles. They're a lot easier to play with than oceans or lakes. Children need puddles. They need little piles of dirt. They need little shrub thickets that they can crawl under and hide in. They need ways to interact with nature on their own scale, realizing that for a young child, an encounter with an earthworm is almost as powerful as an adult encountering giraffes on the plains of Africa. So that's a brief overview of why it's important that we find ways to restore the connection between children and nature, and a few key understandings or key dimensions of what it will take to make that restoration happen. Now we're going to kick over to Rebecca and her portion.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to give you a quick little overview of some of the programs that we are doing here in the League, both at national and at, let me start at the beginning. That's usually a good place to start, as they say. Some of the programs that we're doing here at the League and some things that our chapters are doing. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. Some of these are the more organized programs that Ken spoke about, but also some more of those free plays. So start off, Creek Freaks. I don't know how many of you are familiar with our Creek Freaks program. Creek Freaks is a stream ecology program. Water equality, talks about pollution, talks about watersheds. It's a great program aimed at middle schoolers, so that 10 to 14-year-old age range. There is a curriculum that goes along with it, and it deals with a lot of different issues. They talk about soil texture, there's talk about erosion and plants, and what else? We do the Watershed model, which are great for all the ages. The kids, younger kids up to older kids, really like to see what a watershed is, how it works, what does it mean if it's dirt over here. Okay, that's not good. If there's dirt and runoff here, how does it get into streams? How does pollution work? Here's a soil they do some soil percolation. And stream monitoring, which those that are very familiar with the SOS program, very similar to the SOS biological monitoring. It's based on that, getting out there looking for macroinvertebrates, chemical monitoring, different programs, different things that they're doing to look for various chemicals in the water. And one of the great things about the Creek Freaks program is it can be done in various different ways. We ran here and are doing again this year, so it'll be our third year running a program, the Creek Freaks program, as an after-school program, an 8-week after-school program that these kids are 4th and 5th graders at a local school here where they actually have a creek that runs through their school, so great access to the creek. And we run through the things that are in the Creek Freaks. the different activities and other things that are part of the Creek Freaks program. We are really excited because we are able to expand this after-school program to 2 more schools this year. So we'll be running 3 days a week this spring. Hopefully the snow will stop and they'll be able to get out there in the creek. So the other great thing about Creek Freaks is there is a online presence of Creek Freaks. They have their own website, and the idea is for it to be very interactive. And we want to populate the Creek Freaks website, post data, photos, videos, stories about this creek. So if you're doing a program somewhere, you go on there, can put a little dot where you are and what you've done, and videos and pictures of what you found. Talk about the health, what you found, the health of the stream, so you can go back and monitor that. If other people in a few years come back to that same stream, be able to look at that data. And there's great social media presence as well, Facebook.com, and Creek Freaks is on Twitter as well. For those of you that tweet, their Facebook and their Twitter accounts are very active. So if you have Twitter or you have Facebook, I suggest you like Facebook, like Creek Freaks. And Creek Freaks is available for those that are interested in doing a Creek Freaks program at your chapter, or if you're not a chapter, if you're a nature center and you're interested in running a Creek Freaks training. We do training of trainers, which is the most beneficial. We find training other people to start Creek Freaks programs in their area. So if that's something that you're interested in, please let us know and we can get you connected with the right person. And we will be having a lot of different trainings coming up. I know there's already some scheduled in California and some other ones hopefully coming to Iowa and other areas. So keep an eye out open for that. And there's the information on it, hands-on training. If you're interested in hosting one, please let us know. The person to contact would be Leah, who is our Clean Water Programs Director, and she can help you out, as well as our Clean Water Fellow, Erin, who will be the one who will be organizing that. There's another program that we've done, and this is another example of something that a chapter has started. Central New York chapter for more than 10 years have run Project Watershed, similar to the SOS model, getting middle school and high school students out there, stream monitoring. And the great thing is they use that data for the county agencies. They do their chemical monitoring, they do physical monitoring, and biological monitoring, again, the macroinvertebrates. And this is a great program that the local chapter there has been doing for a very long time and really has been very beneficial to the Syracuse school districts. A lot of the schools are participating. This is getting more into the unstructured program. This is also an after-school program that we ran at the same school called Your Wild Neighbors. This is for the 1st through 3rd, and the reason this came about was we're doing the Creek Freaks program for the 4th and 5th. They wanted something for the younger students, and we put together a Wild Neighbor program, and we weren't really sure what that was going to mean. And I'm an environmental educator. I've been used to that sort of structure. I went in there with what we were going to do for Lesson 1, Lesson 2, Lesson 3, and it turned into that we didn't do any of that. And the kids just wanted to be outside, catching crawfish, catching frogs, down in the mud and getting dirty and building forts and doing all these things. And it was really hard for me to step away from that's okay, that I really wanted to have a formalized program, that's what your parents paid for this program, I'm supposed to teach you something. And it was a great growing experience for me to step back and be like, this is just as important for these kids to be out there digging around in the mud and catching frogs and crawfish and salamanders, and that's not any less important and just as valuable as a formalized lesson. So we ran it 8 weeks, another 8-week program last year, and I threw out the idea that we had to have any sort of lessons. I gave the kids a framework. It wasn't a free-for-all. So in the pictures you see in here, you can see they've made forts. We talked a little bit about animal habitats and what animals need to live, and they all need a habitat. What's a habitat? And then I sent them out to pretend they're an animal and build their own habitat. And you can see just it became a great fort building lesson if you want to call that, and they had a great time. But most of the time what I found is they really just wanted to catch frogs and come home muddy, and their parents would pick them up and they would have mud up to their necks, and they'd look at me like, what? But their kids were so happy, and I never got any complaints, to my face at least. So it was a great program and really set me on this journey of connecting kids to the outside in this free nature play environment. So the other program that we have that leads into that is Tiny Ikes. And some of you might be familiar with our Tiny Ikes program. Tiny Ikes is designed for kids 2 through 5, and it's preschool age kids to get them outside exploring and playing in nature. And there's 2 parts to it. The first part is we have been going to the local pre-K and Head Start programs throughout Montgomery County, specifically around the area where our headquarters is, and going to the schools about 4 to 6 times a year. So we go about every 4 to 6 weeks. So I come back, they get to know me. The minute I walk in, I'm nature lady, and I do have some themes because this is a school day. The kids are used to, it's hard to get them to switch off and just think in a whole new realm that we're just going to go outside and play, and it's not recess. We're going to play in nature. So I try to give them a loose framework, and these are sort of the ideas. We do colors of nature, and we just go outside and we start to look for colors, give them something to look for, but really the goal isn't that they're learning their colors. We do shapes. The goal is that not that they're going to learn all their shapes. That picture that you saw in the front with the kids playing in the leaves, if you notice in their hand they have these little things, and that's a shape thing that they were looking for shapes. But we found this great pile of leaves, and the kids just wanted to jump and play in them, and that's what it turned into for the whole half hour, 45 minutes, and that was fine. So if you've read the book Leaf Man, I usually try to start off with a book to frame what we're talking about. I read Leaf Man, and then we went outside and made our own Leaf Man, and to this day, the best Leaf Man in that picture right there that little girl made, collecting leaves and other things of nature and making what their Leaf Man is. It had, as you've heard, it's been very snowy here, and we kept having to cancel our things. So I did an indoor nature, which is kind of a stretch, but we talked about hibernation, and basically it was kids making blanket forts for a half an hour in their school classroom. So as I said, the program started about 2 years ago. 2012 to 2013 was our first full school year that we tried it out. We found 22 pre-K classes, 3 Head Starts. We went to 13 schools because some schools have an AM and a PM and a Head Start. So we get a lot of classrooms in one school. And we've reached over about 500 students. At the end of last year, we did a survey asking the teachers, and we got great results. And the one question of, do you want us to come back and do this again? 100% said, yes, we would love to have you back. The kids love it. They still talk about it even after you left. They bring things in from what they explored nature. And the great thing about this program, I'm not taking them anywhere. This is all at their school. Nature to them, as Ken talked about, is very small. Their world is very small. So the minute I take them off their plastic playground, that is all they know of outside recess, they go out, they play on the playground, they come out, and I step them onto a green patch of land, that's nature and that's exploration. And there's all these really amazing things to see when really we're right where they go to school, and we're right a couple steps from the little world they've known, but this is a new unexplored territory for them, and it's great. This year, we have visited again 13 schools, but we have even more classes scheduled. Spring is finally here, hopefully, so we're going to be able to reach out to even more schools that have contacted me that want me to come and do these classes. And really great, we have 3 field trips scheduled to headquarters here for them to get out and see even bigger nature and do some nature hikes and see the guys fishing and some other programs, so that's really exciting. We also do programs here at headquarters, like you'd see at a normal nature center, parent-child class for about an hour. But the idea is not we're going to learn about owls, here's 100 facts about owls, now we're going to make an owl craft. It's, here's a loose theme, but we're going to go outside and play and explore. And one of the last classes we did, we found snakes, we found cool things growing on the tree, we did all, and that was just fun and play for them. And I want to talk a little bit about some programs that our chapters are doing as well, which are good examples of things that you could be doing at your chapter as well. Porter County chapter, and I know that there are people from that chapter here on the call. They do these family nature nights. They are at the local school, and I'm sorry if I don't fully represent, this is what I've heard, so maybe later on if there's things I left out and you'd like to add, the people from that chapter, please feel free to let me know. But they're scheduled at local schools. They go and have these very interactive displays with different speakers, and the kids and their families come out in the evenings to attend the program. They said that there's been over 500 students that have attended, and they have even more scheduled in the spring again. So that's a great program, getting youth connected, learning about nature, going out, and working with the local schools. Dwight Lydell, you might heard a little bit about their summer and winter fest. I guess you can guess this is from Winterfest, and they have all sorts of great programs, things that they're doing. It looks like they're doing snow fort building. They did regular fort building. They did frozen blocks of ice, and it looks like they were making some ice sculptures, having the kids out there in the snow, some archery, different things. They're always very well attended. Both Winterfest and Summerfest have been very well attended. It's a great example of a one-time event to get the community out. One of the challenges that people that Dwight Lydell chapter has had is my screen going blank for some reason. Okay. Don't know what that's about. One of the, I know, are we back? Okay. One of the programs, one of the issues that they've had is that follow-up with chapters afterwards, with people that come out to the chapter afterwards. How do you turn those people that are coming out, bringing their kids, into someone that is a member, someone who keeps coming back, and I think that's something a lot of chapters struggle with. They have great events, one-time events, but that doesn't necessarily reflect in their membership. So it's very important that if you are doing these great events and these youth events for the community, one-time events, and they're wonderful, and I encourage chapters to do that, but also make sure you're doing the follow-up afterwards, that people are continuing to be engaged with the league. And here's some other ones that we've heard about. Minnesota Division runs a camp. Waverly, Iowa, there's also a Junior Explorers Summer Youth Camp that they do. Wayne County also does a camp, and these have been highlighted in Outdoor America. I know Wisconsin does talk about one-day events, this great teddy bear hunt out at AD's Sunderland chapter. I'm sure there's a lot more that I didn't mention. You're all doing wonderful things, but we're encouraging you to even think about more wonderful things that you could be doing. So what can you do at your chapter? Think about these. This is the third webinar. We're taking the next step. So you're all here because you want to engage youth more. So think about what do you do at your chapter? What would you like to do? What other things now, after you've heard both Ken and myself and Earl speak in these 3 webinars? What other things? And what do you need to be able to do that? What do you want? One of the great things that's coming is a chapter youth survey that should be coming probably in about a week or 2. Will be sent to every chapter president, and it's about youth and the outdoors and what you want to do and what us at National can provide to you to help support you in reaching your goals. Please encourage your chapter presidents to either fill that out or pass it on to the person that's best to fill it out, so we can provide you with even more tools to help you engage youth in the outdoors. So right now, I would like to pass it back over to Ken, who is going to tell us a little bit more about youth in the outdoors. So
okay.
1 second.
So do I have control? I'm about to have control.
Are you there? I see your screen.
You do? Aha.
I do.
Okay. All right. This is Ken Finch again. Thank you, Rebecca. Some great examples there. I've heard before her story about moving from sort of structured lesson plans to letting the kids just muck around in the stream and build forts, and I particularly love that story. I think it's very instructional. What we're really talking about here is not an either-or. It's not just, you either do unstructured play or you do highly structured educational programs. It's really a continuum, a spectrum, if you will. And where you are on that spectrum, it's partially a matter of what you're comfortable with. It's also partially a matter of what age students or kids you're working with. I tend to emphasize the early childhood years, which technically, legally, are birth to age 8. Age 2.5 to 8 is sort of the most functional years. I emphasize those for a couple of reasons. Number one, because research shows that 80 to 90% of all brain development happens during those years. So essentially, there's just a tremendous amount of growth happening. It's a very ripe time to intervene with any kind of impact for a child, including value formation, which also tends to happen heavily during those years. Old dogs, adults can learn new tricks, but if you really want to set a value, like a value that for conservation, the best time to do it, the most efficient time to do it, is when kids are young. So I tend to stress that era. But again, it's a continuum. There's plenty of room to do things that are gradually more structured and more content-driven as kids get older. Realize as well that play is not wasted time. Here in the U.S., we tend to have a cultural value that unfortunately says that if your kids aren't actively doing some adult-designed activity, then they're wasting time. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Play is a child's work. Play is how children develop, as I mentioned before. And playing in a nice, rich, natural environment is the best play of all. So let's take a quick look. New strategies for nature play. Over the last 10 years or so, lots of people have been rethinking traditional approaches to environmental education, starting to think, well, what might we do instead that reflects this learning, this knowledge about the influence of nature play? Briefly, there's naturalized play spaces. We're going to look at those a little bit more. But these are, you can think of them as playgrounds, but it's not a very apt comparison because they're not things you buy in a catalog and stick in the ground the way you might do with a climber or a swing set. But play areas that are wilded, a little bit like the backyard habitat program that you might be familiar with that our friends at National Wildlife have done for years. Another strategy is relaxing rules. Most natural areas in the country have long had the same general set of rules, and they go something like this. Don't pick or collect anything, stay on the trail, don't dig holes, don't climb trees, don't run, don't throw rocks in the pond, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are well intended, but I bet if a bunch of us on this session tonight could all get together and compare notes about those favorite memories I asked you about, an awful lot of those memories would involve things that are now forbidden in most natural areas. We need to rethink that. We need to lighten up a little bit and let kids do the things that will create the bonds, realizing that children aren't going to do a tremendous amount of damage. It may seem like it, catching a few fireflies or breaking a few sticks is not ecological scale damage. Another strategy, we're seeing more play inserted into environmental education camps, into summer environmental education programs, into summer camps, into youth group type activities. Basically, people are starting to allow free, unstructured time, oftentimes pairing it with a lesson, but then saying, okay, let's just take another half an hour or 60 minutes or something and just let you explore. And if it makes you feel better, you can name this something like individual explorations in natural science. But it's really about giving kids a chance to just go see what they can find and what they enjoy. We're also seeing a very small amount of movement towards something that's common in Europe, usually called play leaders or play naturalists. These are adults who are trained in child development and trained to sort of provoke or facilitate children's play, but not actually lead it. For instance, one park district in Ohio has play naturalists, and their role is to engage families who show up at a park and encourage them to basically do nature play, to walk up the creek, actually in the creek, or to crawl through the prairie for a few yards and see what they find close up and personal, or even to climb a tree. That's a role where the adult sort of nudges kids into the kind of play that used to come naturally, but a lot of kids nowadays no longer really know how to play that way. It's also something called family nature clubs. You might think of these as play dates for nature play. There's some great information about them on the web, especially through the Children in Nature Network. Family nature clubs normally are run by volunteers, a group of parents that typically get together over the internet, schedule meetings in natural areas, and take their kids there all at the same time, and then turn their kids loose to play while the parents sit back and watch. Important role there. The parents are essentially being lifeguards. They're keeping an eye on the play, but they're not intervening in the play unless something dangerous is happening. And then there's also a lot of community nature play coalitions popping up around the country. Typically a lot of different organizations with a shared interest in seeing kids get back outside. So you'll see groups combining around this central theme that might include nature centers or zoos or natural history museums or Boy and Girl Scouts or children's museums. Sometimes even pediatricians will join in these groups, all of them realizing that there's value to having children outside and that working together they can promote it better than they can individually. What we're going to focus on here, though, for the rest of my time, another 10 minutes or so, is so-called nature play. And I want to review a few core principles of it. Some of these we've already touched on. The heart comes first, and playing with nature, not just in nature. I mentioned the crucial role of frequency. It's important to think about nature play as not just active, not just climbing trees or running up and down hills, but also quiet nature play. Times and places where kids can curl up and just look for shapes in the clouds, or maybe read a book, or maybe have a one-to-one chat with their best buddy. Quiet nature play is equally as important as that active nature play, because the quiet nature play is where that spiritual development is more likely to happen. It's important to trust in nature, trust in the play value of nature. Very often people who aren't familiar with nature play think, well, I've just got to build some sort of fantastic treehouse for these kids to play in. No, you don't. Let them do it themselves. Let them find some sticks and build their own little ragtag fort. If you're trying to develop or augment a particular site for nature play, maybe it's your chapter site, maybe it's a nature center, you want to try to mimic nature, but create what I sometimes call a density of diversity, a lot of microhabitats in close proximity that are native to your area and provide lots of opportunities for children to play and engage without having to try to walk around several hundred acres of land, because most young children literally can't do that. It's also important to embrace risk thoughtfully. Risk is a great developmental process for children, but there's an important distinction. Nowadays we talk about the difference between a hazard and a risk. A hazard is something children can't see coming and is dangerous, like a rotten widowmaker stag that looms over their playground, or maybe there's hypodermic needles in the mulch of their playground in an urban area. Those are hazards. Those are things that children don't expect and are truly dangerous and should never be allowed. Risks are different. Risks is something that a child can see and can make a judgment on about whether or not they want to try it. Think of a classic log lying across a little tiny creek and a child coming up to it and trying to decide, do I dare walk across that log? Can I do it? That's a risk, and it's a good developmental process. It's risks like that where they can form and build judgment, where they can begin to learn courage, where they can learn what they're physically capable of. So those sort of minor, thoughtful risks are actually a valuable part of nature play, but you don't want any of those actual dangerous hazards. I also mentioned here applying the test of remembered childhoods. This is a simple concept. If you're trying to engage children in nature play, think back to your own childhood. Think back to the things that you really loved, and then try to find a way to share those experiences. Remember the great parts of your childhood, because pretty likely today's children are going to enjoy it too. Other core principles: throw away the clock. Try to give kids as much time as they can to play outdoors. If you're going into some sort of structured time and you had 10 minutes allowed for nature play, but they are really having a great time, try to let it go longer. Also, provide room to roam, especially for older kids who like to follow creeks or paths or ride their bikes. it's good to allow them some of that freedom once they're up into the range of maybe 10, 11, or 12 years old. They typically don't want to stay within a defined play space anymore. They want to explore, and that's great for them. Don't fear the reaper means, again, don't fear the minor damage children can do to nature. In fact, nature play, they will do damage. You know, they will squish ants. They might fry ants with a magnifier, which I used to do. They may pull the wings off beetles, break sticks, maybe chase a fox away from a potential den site. All of these are not done out of any evil intent. Basically science experiments for kids. They're starting to learn about nature. And part of the way to learn empathy is kids have to learn that they actually can affect and even hurt other living things. If we want them to grow up to care for nature, they have to understand that they can have a direct impact on it. I would never, ever encourage a kid to do harm to nature, but nor should we panic when they do. It's actually kind of ironic how often I will hear from a nature center or a wildlife refuge that feels like they can't possibly allow kids to play in their woods because the kids would do too much damage, and yet 100 yards away is a big building and a big parking lot and a big road that those same places made, which did a lot more ecological damage than 1,000 kids will do playing in their woods in 1,000 years. So don't fear the reaper. Chill out on the rules, as I mentioned before, and pretty much forget structured school programs and nature play. That's just not a good match. Maybe someday it will be, but right now our schools are so focused on tests that there just isn't much room for the kind of unstructured play that kids really should do. Okay, I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures now about simple nature play features, give you a little idea about what nature play really could look like at your nature center or your chapter site, whatever you have. First, I'm going to give you one little cartoon, though. Look, free-range children. This is what it's about. If you look at that cartoon, you see kids rolling down the hill. You see some kids running just for the fun of running. Remember when running was just fun? A couple of girls, I think, maybe jumping a rope back there, one standing on her head, one that your insurance agent would probably say is committing suicide by swinging on the rope, but is actually, kids really aren't suicidal. They take pretty good care of themselves. And then the mystery kid on the left, my theory has always been that he's peeing on the tree, but other people think he's playing hide and go seek. You can take your own choice. So nature play can look as simple as that, a big pile of leaves, or a couple of magnifiers, or maybe some butterfly nets, or think of the other tools you could share with kids. You know, simple binoculars, shovels and pails, maybe aquatic dip nets if you have a pond or a little stream nearby. You can create little areas for kids to hop with partial pieces of bark, or if you look in the background, with stumps that are actually embedded into the ground so they can't tip over. This particular place is a nature center, and the director there tells me that kids actually spend as much time looking under those half logs as they do jumping them from them, because that's where they find, daddy longlegs and beetles and roly-polies, things like that. Sometimes it's just a matter of a few rocks to climb up. This girl, in her mind, just scaled Mount Everest. And notice as well, they're in the middle of a tall grass prairie, and by going up that maybe 3-foot stack of rocks, all of a sudden she has a view. Her world has opened up. Great nature play. You can provide kids with sticks for building forts, or they can find their own sticks and build their own forts. You can also help them with something that's sometimes called a vine teepee. It's a very simple teepee-type structure that you grow vines like gourds on, leaving a hole so kids can go in and have a nice little quiet niche. It can happen in wintertime, and Rebecca showed you some great pictures of that. Kids can take so-called loose parts, pieces of nature that they can use the way they decide, and create things like seesaws, which are now almost uniformly banned in playgrounds, formal playgrounds, but kids can still do it and do just fine with something like this. Rolling tree cookies around, carrying tree cookies, good exercise. Kids actually enjoy it. How about just a big mound of dirt, a dump truck load of dirt to climb up, to run down, to dig in, to turn into mud with the addition of a hose? Or this little girl, I watched her quite a while and asked her what she was doing. She was making chocolate butter, she told me. She worked at it very studiously. Or if you're lucky, maybe there's a real creek that kids can play in and find real life in. Or you can create a digging pit. Fossil hunt, it says here, but those are in reality just deer bones that are pretty easy to get in most parts of the country. But burying deer bones and letting kids dig them up, that's great pretend play. More logs and stumps to bounce on. A little bit of tree climbing with an adult or two to help. They're not actually, the kids aren't roped in, they aren't belayed, but they're trusting kids. They're, again, giving kids that opportunity to approach managed risk. If they're too afraid to climb up the tree, the adults don't make them climb up in the tree, but they give them the opportunity. Or just rolling down a hill, or sitting in a little man-made nest made out of willow branches, which are wonderfully soft and easy to sculpt with. These two girls probably are imagining themselves as being baby birds. Or a wonderful little quiet niche for this girl. Look at all the things around her, all the different stimulations. It's like her own little tiny place in the world. Sometimes it doesn't need to be anything more than a patch of sunny grass, take a nap in, or a hammock. You can just provide a hammock and let them simply enjoy the quiet. Remember I mentioned about quiet nature play. That's a perfect example of how you can foster it. And sometimes it's just about giving them a chance to smell the flowers, as simple as that. You can get more elaborate with nature play. You can create undulating grassy berms so kids can go up and down and along, which is actually really good for them because that's how they learn balance and develop other muscles. Most of the play areas we do in the U.S., the very first thing we do is make them as level as a pool table. Kids actually benefit by having unlevel play spaces. Some places create the skeletons of forts and little tree houses, and kids can then add their own branches or pine boughs or little bits of fabric that they're provided with. If you're really fancy and have some serious heavy equipment, you can provide a miniature cave. This is no more than 3 or 4 feet deep, but for a child, that's a wonderful little play site. Notice it's not plastic, it's not in primary colors, and you cannot buy it at Home Depot or Lowe's. You can also create art places. On the left, you can see a little plexiglass easel that kids can use watercolor to paint pictures of what they see and then wash it off with a hose. Watercolors are completely non-toxic. To the right is actually a loom, very simple, made out of twine, and kids can weave in flowers or branches or cattails or anything they want and create their own little artwork there. Gardening is also terrific for kids. It's more elaborate because it requires more ongoing care, at least a couple days a week. But gardening is a great way for children to bond with nature. Or you can, if you're really fancy, create big sand areas, sand landscapes with water and rocks. Kids always love sand, water, and rocks. Some places have gotten really expensive with nature play. I don't recommend it unless you're like a major tourist destination for some reason, but artificial rock walls for kids to scramble up and down. This is actually an artificial stream that's extremely well done. It's very shallow, it's recirculating water, and the rocks are cobblestone size, which are perfect for building dams and chutes, which is what kids have always liked to do in streams. This is also an artificial pond. If you look really carefully, you can see there's actually gravel and rocks that come up to within a foot of the water. They dug this out deep and backfilled it with gravel so that emergent plants can grow out of the gravel and insects can find plenty of homes for their aquatic larvae. The kids can walk right out into it without any fear of drowning. And then some places actually put simple signs up in their nature play areas. And I like this one because it's so simple. Build a fort, take a hike, get wet, explore nature. No great long paragraphs. Sometimes it's helpful to provide parents with some paragraphs and text about why nature play is valuable, but all kids need is a little nudge. Finally, as I start to wrap up here, I want to note that creating nature play simply doesn't have to be hard. Calvin will give us a perfect illustration. Look, a trickle of water running through some dirt. I'd say our afternoon just got booked solid. And just for fun, I've got 5 more pictures to show you because the world is a big place and sometimes it helps to have perspective. In Europe, play is approached very differently. They really value play and they value risk, and so you get wonderful things like this swing set with a giant pile of sand at either end for kids to launch into. You actually get public parks with little rafts that kids can paddle and pull out on their own. You get wonderful little challenges like this Jacob's ladder where, if you notice carefully, it's on a pivot at the top, and if kids fall off, they go for splash. Or this climbing structure in a Berlin playground. Or this climbing structure also in a European playground. Europeans have a little different view, and I think, frankly, if we're lucky and if our kids are lucky, eventually we're heading that direction too. A few websites that you might want to look at for some ideas and background information. I think I'll try to go back to this slide when we get to questions, but my own organization, Green Hearts, the National Wildlife Site of Be Out There, Children in Nature Network I mentioned, Natural Start, which is being run by the North American Association for Environmental Education, which focuses particularly on nature and early childhood. And let's see, one little wrap up here. Some old dude named Plato seems to have gotten it pretty well. The most effective kind of education is that a child should play amongst lovely things. That's my organization. I'm very happy and proud to be working hand in hand with the Isaac Walton League on this project, and we've actually worked on several now. And this is our friends at Isaac Walton. So that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully we have time for a few questions. And Rebecca, I think I'm going to turn that back to you.
Yes. Thank you, Ken. And as you can see, my email is up here. If you have any questions that come up after that you haven't thought of during the webinar, there have been some more specific questions, please feel free to email me, and I will try to help you. If you have any questions, again, I encourage you to look at your control panel. You'll see a little section that is on questions, and you can type your question in there, and either for myself or Ken, and we can try to answer that for you if you have anything else you'd like to add. I will also remind you at this time, last webinar we talked a little bit about the Engaging Youth in the Outdoors manual that we have for chapters, that every chapter has one. I offered up to anybody who would like a CD-ROM to please contact me, and a few of you did. If there's anyone else on this call that wasn't here last week and is interested in getting a copy of the League's Engaging Youth in the Outdoors chapter manual, youth manual, to please send me an email, and I will make sure that I get that out to you. Okay, I see one question coming. 1 second. Okay. Someone asked the question, we have access to the last 3 sessions. Yes, we are recording them. We have been recording them, and the first one we're going to redo with visuals. So when we have that ready, we will announce the links that everyone can get to anyone can access it. I think it'll be up on our YouTube channel, but we will make sure everyone who's signed up for the webinars, and also just our general membership, we will announce where they are located if anyone wants to listen to them. If for some reason you need them earlier, we can send you a direct link to them, but it's probably easier to wait till we have it up for public domain on the YouTube channel. And there's another question that comes from Diane, and I am reading it. Ken, if you understand, what is the takeout menu?
The takeout menu refers to trying to give parents or even teachers some ideas that they can then use at home or in their sort of day-to-day life to bring nature play back so that it's not just at your chapter or your nature center. For instance, on my own website, Green Hearts, there's some information about things you can do in a backyard to facilitate nature play. There's lots of resources out there about modifying parks for nature play. So the idea of a takeout menu is to make sure it gets beyond just a one-shot experience at some destination and instead becomes an ongoing part of a child's life.
Okay. I have another question. And their question is how to get in touch with a chapter that does the Minnesota Division Camp. Well, it's actually the Minnesota Division, so it is all our chapters of Minnesota that are running it. Beth, I would suggest that you send me an email. That my email was up earlier. If Ken can flip to that page where my email was, yep. And people can see that. That I can put you in contact with the person that runs that.
There it is.
And also I have a message here from Jim that the Indiana Division also does an excellent week-long camp if anyone's in that area, that you could check them out too. But yeah, please, if you have questions about specific chapters and who's doing what, if you're in a certain area, I can put you in touch with that person. Okay. All right. I have my own little tiny Ike here that has joined me, who's rustling and making noise in the background. So if you hear anything, it's her.
There's
So.
no better training for this than your own children, by the way.
Exactly. So I don't see any more questions, and we're right at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I want to thank everybody for your time, and I hope this webinar series has been helpful to you and you found it useful. Thank you for participating, and I hope that you're in touch with us, and I can't wait to hear all about the great youth programs that you're starting. And thank you, Ken, for helping with these webinars as well.
My
So
pleasure,
everyone have
and
a
my
good
thanks
night.
to all of you.
Okay, so thank you again, and everyone have a very good night.
Good night, folks.